Yeah. Actually, we have white line. The other one was.
You don't know where to stop the story.
Alrighty, good evening, everyone. My name is Daniel Baird, and I'm an event facilitator here at McNally Robinson Booksellers. Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we are on Treaty 1 territory, and the land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Inninawak, Anishinaabe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. In addition, McNally Robinson Booksellers itself rests on the land once occupied by the Métis community of Roostertown. We're gathered here tonight to celebrate the launch of Also Known as Jaime Dorn by Karen Emilson, a tragicomic novel about finding one's place in the world, the consequences of keeping secrets, and the redemptive powers of unconditional love. Karen will be out in a moment to read from the book and speak on the book. Following the conversation, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions. If you are one of those folks here in the audience today or online, obviously, you don't have to raise your hand, but the folks here, please raise your hand and I'll come by with this wireless microphone just to make sure that you're audible for those watching on the stream. Not to discourage you from projecting your voice, just for those online. I will be back at the end of the close of the event, just to review the signing procedure. But for now, I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's very special guests. Karen Emilson is the author of the historical novel, Be Still the Water, and the best-selling biographies, Where Children Run, When Memories Remain, and co-author of My Every Breath. She is an award-winning former newspaper reporter and freelance writer. Like her fictional character, Jaime Dorn, she grew up in southern Ontario and moved to Manitoba's Interlake region, an area well known for its rugged landscape and resilient people. Most of her books are based there, and the fictional stories she tells are inspired by small-town life. Now she lives in Winnipeg, but in the summer she returns to Steep Rock, where the air is fresh, the water pristine, and the characters who live inside her come to life. Please join me in welcoming Karen Emilson.
So thank you very much, Daniel. And I have to say, so that was pretty cool because I remember when Daniel was born. His mother, Danelle, is my daughter-in-law's cousin. And I remember when Daniel's father, Alex Bear, came to Ashern. Handsome, young, single RCMP officer, who doesn't love a man in uniform. Danelle Price caught his eye and the rest is history, as they say. Now, Danelle is my travel agent. I see her mother regularly at the Steep Rock Beach Park, where I spend the summer, and we're at our grandson's birthday parties together. Small towns, don't you just love them? When I moved to Manitoba 42 years ago, I would have never, not in a million years, would I have guessed that in the North Interlake region, I'd fulfill my lifelong dream of becoming a writer. And so I'd like to mention today is a very, very special day. Goodness. It is the 28th anniversary of the launch of my first book, Where Children Run. It was an unforgettable night during Ashern's Midnight Madness in the middle of a raging snowstorm. Days later, twins Dennis Pischke and I were guests on Peter Warren's radio talk show, and the rest, as they say, is history. And so now, I would like to introduce to all of you Dennis Pischke. Dennis is here today. I'm glad that they're here. And I know there are some diehard Where Children Run fans here tonight who've never met him. So if you happen to have your copy with you, I'm sure Dennis would love to meet you and sign it for you later. Now there are people in the audience today who've told me the Twins story is their favorite book of mine. A few say it is their favorite book of all time, and I am so incredibly grateful for that. There are a few here tonight who say the same thing about Be Still the Water, and I'm especially grateful for that. considering they are two very different books. Well, also known as Jaime Dorn, is nothing like either one. I'm sorry. It's light, a bit magical. I think it's funny. It's full of nostalgia, and it's set in a funeral home in 1980. For those in the audience who love reading true stories, know that all of the references to well-known people and events are true to the timeline. It was so much fun writing about a time period that I know so well that I think I found my niche on what I want to write in the future. So before I read, I'm going to read a little bit from it tonight, but before I do that, I'd like to tell you how I came to write this particular story. But first I'll give you an idea what it's about for those of you who haven't read the back copy yet. Okay. When your whole life is a lie, how do you tell the truth? Jaime Dorn is a tough-talking wannabe artist whose train wreck past has left her uninspired and insecure. Tired of the lies and desperate to outrun a police investigation, she hides her grandfather's ashes in a knapsack and jumps on a bus for the West Coast. Finally free of her shady so-called parents, she vows to keep one final promise to Gramps and live an honest life. But when she becomes stranded in a quirky bucolic town 1,000 miles from her destination, Jaime must concoct a fictitious past to conceal her identity and the crime that will send her to jail. Everyone in town believes her, except for a shark-eyed cop and the clairvoyant funeral director who was convinced she was guided there by her dead grandfather's spirit. Small town life turns out better than she expects, but as her shameful past collides with her idyllic future, Jaime faces an impossible decision: keep her freedom by running from the life she has always wanted, or stay, tell the truth, but risk losing it all. So you're probably, for those of you who've read Be Still the Water, you may be asking yourself right now, so how can this be the sequel to Be Still the Water that Karen promised us? And who is this Jaime Dorn? Well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to explain a little bit of that. And what I'll do is I'll just take you back 19 years to April of 2005, East End, Saskatchewan. It was a magical experience, one I've never forgotten. I was so affected by it that I recorded it in my journal, so as I was writing this, I was able to look back and to see the date was April 22nd, 2005. I was at the Wallace Stegner House in East End. The house was the childhood home of renowned American writer Wallace Stegner and initiated by Saskatchewan writer Sharon Butala. The local arts council in East End purchased the turn-of-century house on the edge of town and turned it into an artist's retreat. I booked 17 days of seclusion so that I could work on the nonfiction book I was writing at the time about the cattle industry. The mystical experience I allude to happened on the 5th day. I was upstairs in the writing room situated at the back of the house. Through the large window, I could see the white picket fence in yard below and a back lane that ran parallel to the narrow river that wound its way through town. And then I watched as out of nowhere, a late spring storm blew in from the west. I could see it rolling across the Cypress Hills toward the town like a tsunami. An elderly gentleman wearing a white cowboy hat, pushing a cane, hurried along the back lane, no doubt heading for home, hoping to beat the storm. And then, like watching a movie, a storyline and a cast of characters came flooding into my mind. I was tired of serious nonfiction. I dreamed of being a writer since I was a child and wanted to write fiction, but didn't have a story idea until then. I knew it would be funny. It would be the story of a runaway from Toronto who becomes stuck in a small town, and despite her insistence, the old folks who've taken her in, a fellow in a cowboy hat, just wouldn't let her go. I grabbed my journal and began furiously making notes. as it is so often when you're a creative person and you're working on a creative project, when the one you're working on becomes difficult, the temptation to start something new, chuckles, can often pull you away. After a few hours, though, I forced myself to set aside the journal, but the images stayed on my mind, and I got back to the book I was supposed to be working on. The next morning, as I awoke, I could hear two characters talking, and I am not kidding. It was like a dream, but all I heard was the voices. The girl's name was Jennifer, and the young man's name was Scott. I made a note of their names in the journal. I spent the rest of my time in East End working on the cattle book, and even wrote a few of the more inspiring parts of it while I was there. And I spent the afternoons and evenings exploring the town. I visited the Dinosaur Museum, walked the hills, and became acquainted with the local potters, and even got up at 4 a.m. to watch as they opened the kiln. I have loved hand-thrown pottery ever since. What a great thing to see. 2 days before I left for home, manuscript nearly complete, I ventured into a big old brick building that was once the bank. Every small town has one of those buildings, right? And it had been converted into a coffee shop, bookstore, and place for local artisans to sell their paintings and such on consignment. It was delightful to find such an inspiring business in such a small town. As I waited in line to buy a coffee, I surveyed the table of books and photographs that was alongside. I was standing, waiting in line, and there were books and photographs, and one particular sketch caught my eye. It was of a young woman dressed in late 80s jeans, sweater, and hiking boots. And she was on the edge of a precipice, tentatively peering over. And I couldn't see the full image as it was blocked by a row of books. So the line I was in moved forward. So I took a step ahead, but then this little voice in my head told me to go back and pick it up. You know how, do you guys, I'm not the only one that this happens to, right? Okay, good. So I tried to ignore the little voice, but it was insistent. So I stepped out of line and went back. When I lifted the numbered print in pencil, the artist had written at the bottom the young woman's name, and it was Jennifer. It was an incredible experience that literally buckled my knees and left me speechless. So I went back the next day and bought it, framed it, and hung it on my wall. So this is the print here. There it is, proof, the name Jennifer on the bottom. As soon as I finished the cattle book, I started drafting Edge of Nowhere. To make a long story shorter, when Lake Manitoba flooded in 2011, I returned to a different notebook where I'd sketched out what was Be Still the Water. I finished that one. But before it was done, Jennifer kept pulling me back. And that's when I knew that Jennifer should become stranded in Lundy, Manitoba, instead of East End, Saskatchewan. I even wrote her into Be Still the Water during the final revisions. She makes a brief appearance on page 176 in June of 1980. But what the main character in Be Still the Water, Austa, doesn't know is that Jennifer arrived in town 5 months earlier in January of 1980, and that she is the one who will solve the little mystery left at the end of Austa's story. And so now what I have here, also known as Jaime Dorn, AKA for short, is a companion rather than a sequel. I know early on I called it a sequel, but the sequel, you know, you write a book. With the Pischke twins, we wrote Where Children Run. It was from their childhood. And then we started when they were, this one ended when they were 16, we started when they're 16 and kept going. Well, this one, because of the overlapping time frame, an addition of characters, plus you're telling the story from two different points of view. I realized it's actually called a companion book. And I didn't know when I started writing it exactly how it was going to turn out. And as for who Jaime Dorn is, the character Jennifer will explain all that in the book. We've got some people, come on in. Come on. We have some folks here from out of town, so grab a seat, you guys. So I thought right now, before I finish, and I could read a little bit, or we could do questions. Which would you prefer? Does anyone have a burning question they wanted to ask? Okay, I'll read, and then we'll get back to questions, okay? All right. So I'll just start at the beginning, because if I start in the middle, none of it will make any sense. Okay, so this book is dedicated to Diane. Don't you cry. All right, chapter 1. They said we would remember 1980 as the year Trivial Pursuit was created, the YMCA threatened to sue the village people, and poor John Lennon was shot dead in New York City. Gas prices were driving people so crazy they lined up for blocks just to save a few cents. Why do I remember 1980 so well? 3 things happened in January that changed my life. I quit smoking. I found the only person who loved me dead on his basement floor. And because the police were looking for me, I changed my name and took off to the West Coast. Technically speaking, Gramps died the week before Christmas, but still. As those last days of 1979 counted down, so did UNESCO's Year of the Child, and ironically, China introduced its one-child policy. That's what had me all riled up. Plus the fact that nobody even seemed to give a shit. Hockey fans were the worst. All they cared about was if the Toronto Maple Leafs would make the playoffs. So before I boarded that Greyhound in the last act of protest, I stood in front of the Woolworths in downtown Hamilton, holding a sign in front of a sign denouncing the Chinese government. The magic marker sketch of a crying baby peering out of a toilet sent an obvious message, the flushing away of innocent lives. Not a single motorist honked in support, but a few gave me the finger. They don't have toilets in China, yelled a jerk in a Datsun wearing a 3-piece suit. F you, I screamed, throwing a rock at his window. It was more like a stone and did no damage, but I had a bigger one ready in case he circled back. More than 40 years have passed since then, and I'm still astounded by how courageous I was to leave behind the only life I knew in pursuit of something greater. I was only 19 years old and didn't realize how my decisions would hurt the people I loved the most. The only explanation I can give is that when you're alone and terrified, the voice of desperation is the loudest one you hear. 38 hours after departing Hamilton, Ontario, the Greyhound arrived at the Winnipeg bus station. Unable to sleep, I'd spent the night staring out at the full moon, listening to the woman beside me chain smoke her way through a life story almost as tragic as mine. I hadn't had a cigarette since 11:55 on New Year's Eve. I'd smoked since grade 9 and vowed I'd quit when they hit $1 a pack. Anticipating a hellish first week of withdrawal, I sat in the non-smoking section, but let's be honest, that invisible line, a fantasy, like expecting your imaginary friend to show up on moving day. I swallowed another aspirin. Hitching my heavy knapsack over my shoulder, I squinted against the bright lights on the platform and followed Chainsmoker into the depot. Hoping to avoid the awkward, we should stay in touch but knew we wouldn't goodbye, I wove through the crowd and ducked into the washroom. The mirror was huge and the lighting harsh. Normally, I rocked the famous Farrah Fawcett flip, but my hair was greasy and limp. I looked like shit. There was no time to curl it, so I splashed water on my face and leaned toward the mirror, baring my teeth like a vicious dog. In my haste, I'd left my toothbrush in Gramps' bathroom, so I used a paper towel to rub the fuzz off my teeth. Back in the noisy lounge, the dispatcher rattled off the departing gates for places I'd never heard of: Brandon, Paw, Flin Flon. I ignored the little voice in my head cautioning me to get on the right bus and boarded on platform 8. I settled on a seat near the front and held up my stub for the driver. Once we were moving and everyone's cigarettes were lit, I curled up and closed my eyes against the smoke and streetlights along Portage Avenue. I awoke 3 hours later to the tire bumping against the curb and the driver announcing a 40-minute breakfast stop. The hydraulic swoosh of the door ushered in a startling blast of Arctic air. Out the window, I saw the town's main street whitewashed in a shimmery frost. Exhaust fog hung in the air. Sedans and pickup trucks with ugly plastic ovals stuck to the windows and extension cords wrapped around the side mirrors crawled down the double-wide street past the flat-fronted businesses. The one-pump gas station looked deserted, its metal Texaco signs swaying in the wind. I'd felt the damp chill of Ontario's north the day before, but dismissed the wait-and-see warnings about Manitoba. Seriously, how bad could it be? The old guy seated in front of me flipped up his jacket hood. "We're not in Kansas anymore," he said with a chuckle. His broad chest, cheery eyes, and calm voice reminded me of my Gramps. I followed him out onto the sidewalk. On the horizon, crescent beams of light framed the rising sun. "A sundog," he said. "Not a good sign." Everyone ahead of us jumped foot to foot, trying to keep warm. As we inched toward the plywood shack in front of the restaurant door, the squeaky squeak of heels cutting into the snow gave me the heebie-jeebies. Holy hell, was it cold. My eyes watered. Each breath I took seared my lungs, and the exhale froze in the air. Tucking my nose inside my rabbit fur jacket, I tried to make myself small. A wind gust swirled and lifted my hair in its vortex. I turned, but couldn't escape it. We shivered past the restaurant sign, "Welcome to the lunch," home of the best burgers in Manitoba. As the passengers ahead of us stepped into the shack, the thin aluminum door whipped shut behind them. "Come on," I whispered. Old guy offered me his suede, beaded, gauntlet-style mitts. I should have taken them, but shook my head, told him I'd be fine as the line inched forward. We waited outside for only a few painfully slow minutes. That's just how cold it was. When I was a little girl, me and Gramps watched the Andy Griffith Show on his old black and white, and stepping into that diner was like being teleported to Mayberry. The locals drinking coffee watched as chairs scraped across the tiled floor, as passengers filled the banquettes among the drafty windows, the red-orange vinyl seats releasing a floofy fart when we sat down. My senses were pleasantly overwhelmed by the brewing coffee, warm cinnamon buns, sizzle of eggs and bacon frying, all of it mingling with a trace of last night's onions on the grill. I slid onto a stool at the lunch counter. Whoever owned the place had decorated the walls with enlarged framed photos of the town in its earlier days. All were askew, as if bumped by kids standing in the booths. The one hanging on the nearest wall depicted a man and young boy wearing suits in front of a two-story house. Handwritten across the bottom, it read, "Funeral Home, 1932. Two waitresses darted from table to table, pouring coffee and scribbling orders on small blue pads, tearing them off as they rushed through the swinging kitchen door. As I pondered why the funeral home photo was the only one hanging straight, call it my artistic eye, a guy sat down next to me. He looked in his late 20s, but it was hard to know for sure because beards always make guys look older. "Good morning," he said. "Cold out, eh?" His eyes moved from my jacket down to my Pat Benatar boots. Here we go again. Honestly, I knew his type. Green checkered lumberjack shirt, work boots, worn out jeans, small silver hoop in his left ear. Most definitely a construction worker. They stuck to me like flies. Gambling that he was smart enough to take the hint, I wasn't interested. I lifted the greasy menu. "Welcome to friendly Manitoba," he said. "You're not from around here, are you?" "Just passing through," I said. Ignoring him, I flipped open the top flap of my knapsack, and that's when I noticed my curling iron was missing. What the hell? I started digging inside. "What can I get for you?" the waitress asked. Irritated, I looked up. "The breakfast special, scrambled, whole wheat toast and strawberry jam. I'm a vegetarian. Try not to burn it like the last place." The waitress pointed her pencil at lumberjack shirt. "The usual?" He nodded and held up his mug for a refill. After she left, he asked if I'd lost something. When I didn't reply, he tried chatting me up again, but my mind was already in reverse. Where the hell did it go? My brand new, top-of-the-line, salon quality curling iron that took 3 months of savings to buy. I scanned the restaurant, wondering which one of those bus losers stole it. And then I remembered Chainsmoker. She rode beside me from Hamilton and got off in Winnipeg. But the whole time she kept wishing aloud for naturally blonde hair beautiful as mine, that bitch. The waitress set our plates down and tucked the bills underneath. Perfect. I ran the same scam in Thunder Bay and Dryden. Wait, I said, this isn't what I ordered. But it's the breakfast special. I told you I'm a vegetarian, I don't eat meat. Pointing at the bacon, I said, I'm not paying for that. She leveled her gaze at me. Since when do uppity animal rights chicks wear fur coats? And then, in the ultimate waitress revenge, she snatched the bacon off the plate and stuffed it in her mouth. She smiled as she chewed, even licked the grease off her fingers. I'd scrapped plenty when I was young and knew I couldn't take waitress girl who had the shoulders of a Russian gymnast. She grinned at lumberjack shirt and trotted back to the kitchen like she'd just won the gold. A little too loudly, I said, I'm still not paying for it. A table of locals turned. In the middle of all the farmer caps and coveralls sat a dark blue uniform, the RCMP. This cop had a Mick Jagger face and eyes like a hammerhead shark. Cops. They often came to the two-bedroom shack where I grew up to question my fake dad Cliff and lately my fake mom Connie too. Cliff would prance around with his chin stuck out taunting, you ain't got nothing on me, daring them to punch him. But a few times when we were alone, his eyes darkened. Anybody can be a city cop, he said, but it takes a certain breed of asshole to join the RCMP. The one watching me stared hard. My heart jerked. Cops always asked questions and wanted to see identification. That's a complication I didn't need. I flashed him my best girl next door smile and pretending I had nothing to hide, turned back to my breakfast. Did you see her? I said to lumberjack shirt in a low tone so the cop wouldn't hear me. Where I lived, she'd get fired for that. He took a big bite of toast. Leave it to Aggie to say what everyone is thinking, he said, one corner of his mouth turning up. Aggie? Who names their kid that? It's short for Aganitha, he said. Even worse. No wonder she's pissed off. A man took lumberjack shirt's hand, sat down, and they started talking. Perfect. I could slip out and hopefully no one would remember me. I ate quickly, planning my next move. When a line formed at the cash register, I saw my opportunity. I got up, hid behind a heavy-set man, stuffed the bill into my pocket, and slipped out the door. If I was going to make it to Salt Spring Island, I needed food. Peering through the shack window, I zeroed in on a row of flat-fronted buildings across the street. A shopping cart was stuck in a stovemac under a red co-op sign. Bracing against the cold, I bolted outside. I bought that coat in November at one of those weekend blowout, all inventory must go, we pay the sales tax events, and the woman who took my $49 said rabbit fur was warm as mink. What a load of bullshit. I pulled open the door and the wind carried me inside. I couldn't believe my luck. The co-op was a thief's paradise. Cramped with plenty of blind spots and no mirrors, there wasn't a clerk in sight. My fake mom, Connie, would have loved it. When I was little, if she thought I wasn't watching, Connie hid food in her sweater or left items at the bottom of the cart. Once I asked if we'd go to hell for stealing, and she said, God doesn't mind if we only take what we need. I hurried down the aisles, jamming what I could inside the knapsack. In the produce section, I split a banana from the bunch and slipped it in my pocket. As I picked up an apple, a female voice behind me said, "Can I help you?" A less experienced thief would have spun around red-faced, but I calmly held the apple in plain sight as I turned. The clerk, fine-boned and timid like a fox, reminded me of Connie. And just like her, the clerk's gaze went to the floor as if she was doing the stealing. "Do you have any kiwis?" I asked. Her eyebrows clenched. "Key what?" Sensing victory, I told her to forget it and handed her the apple. "It's hard finding them in the city this time of year, never mind in a shitbox town like this," I said, spinning around and heading for the exit. Once outside, that pumped-up feeling of outsmarting someone deflated the moment I looked across the street. How that bus got away so fast, I don't know, but that fucking thing was gone. Sorry about the swearing. I struggled a bit with that because I don't swear very much. A lot of my friends don't swear very much. And my husband's family, well, they don't swear at all. My sister-in-law, she read the book and she said to me, she says, well, I was a bit surprised there was swearing in there. But just so that you know, for those of you that find, don't like swearing, I'm just saying now, she was pretty mad. She was pretty mad. Things start to change, just so you know, okay? So do we have any questions? If not, I'll mention a few things that I sometimes get asked. People often ask me, where do your characters come from, and are they based on real people? Now, this is a logical thing, considering I have written quite a bit of nonfiction. I wrote the twin story. And so they're wondering, and I have to say that no, they're not based on real people, not in personality or appearance. A few of my characters that I create, I can see clearly in my mind, and it's very weird because they don't look like anyone I've ever seen before. I don't know these people, but I can see them in their mind. And others I can't see, but I know them the same way that I know like family members. So no, I don't, they're not based on other people or people that we know. The hardest part about writing this book and why it took so long is because trying to fix the mystery, to tell the end of the mystery at Be Still the Water, meant I had to write a story that was simultaneously, it was taking place as the same time as the other story in time frame, just from a different point of view. And that was very hard to do without writing spoilers, because I didn't want to spoil the experience. For people who haven't read Be Still the Water, I didn't want to spoil the experience. And so another thing people are asking me now is, in which order should they read the books, Be Still the Water and also known as Jaime Dorn? So I would say it this way. I would say that if you're someone who enjoys a mystery, then I'd suggest, if you're wanting to read Be Still the Water, then I would suggest reading it first and then Jaime Dorn. And if you read Be Still the Water a long time ago, because it came out in 2016, you might want to do a quick skim reread, just so that to refresh your memory on a few things before you start Jaime Dorn. It won't take you, you don't have to labor it. Like it's a thick book. I see if you don't really feel like reading it again. I understand that, but you might want to do a skim. But having said all that, if you're someone whose reading experience is ruined by looking for clues, or you can't stand it and you have to skip ahead and read the ending because you just want to enjoy the book and you don't like that tension, you feel like you're rushing and you're missing too much, then you'll want to read Jaime Dorn first, okay? Because I've had a few people say that to me, like they're so busy trying to figure out the mystery that they sort of, missing the story. So, okay. Let's see. Now, okay. So here's something that I think you might find interesting. Whether you've read the book or not, but I think the people who have read it, there are a few people in the audience who have read the book. I had another interesting magical moment while I was working on this book. And there were a few things, but the most memorable one occurred during the research stage. Because even though I write fiction, I really want it to feel real. I want readers to be reading it and saying, did this really happen? I don't want it to be so far-fetched that it's not believable. I mean, there are runaways, and if you've ever been in the Winnipeg bus station, you could actually get on the wrong bus and end up in the wrong place, especially if you fell asleep. And if you don't have a map, You don't know where you're going. This bus is just driving somewhere. Anyway, so now one of the subplots in the book is she ends up obviously staying in this town for a while. And one of the subplots is the quest to find a guest speaker for Lundy's July 1st, 1980 fundraising event. I know that sounds maybe a little bit boring, but it's not, because small towns, these are big deals. This is a fundraising event, and so they need a high profile speaker. So I'm thinking, okay, my guy who's gonna go looking for this speaker, who's he going to call? He's gonna call him. He's gonna phone him up and ask him to come. So I needed someone high profile, alive in the 1980s, preferably a Manitoban of Icelandic descent. So I didn't have anybody in mind. So I Googled it. And up popped the name, Sir William Stevenson. Does that mean anything to any of you? Yes? A few? Okay. So apparently, this man who I'd never heard of was an international spy, a friend to Ian Fleming, the author of the James Bond series. Stevenson, a man called Intrepid, liked his martinis shaken and not stirred. So I discovered that Bill McDonald, the Manitoba author, wrote The True Intrepid. So I went out immediately and bought the book. And I discovered that not only did William Stevenson grow up in Winnipeg, but he had relatives that he used to visit in Lundar, Manitoba. But I also discovered that in 1980, he was a very old man who lived in Bermuda. Like I said, I like to try and make my fiction as real as possible. So what are the odds that this fellow's gonna phone and ask him to come from Bermuda to speak at the event, Turns out they were friends growing up, and he thinks that that's just a good idea, so he's going to do it. And then on page 16, I read, Stevenson covertly visited Winnipeg in the summer of 1980. I almost fell off my chair, and I actually had to go lie down. I thought, I couldn't believe it. So here I want to write fiction, so what I'm saying to you, for those of you who read the book, and when you do read the book, okay, it could have actually happened. So if you like espionage and you want to read more about William Stevenson, I'd suggest you pick up a copy of this book. It's very, very cool stuff. I had to stop because all of a sudden, the rabbit hole, the research rabbit hole, and the whole idea of a different creative project. Yeah, I had to stop because I thought, this is a very cool book. Okay, so before we wrap up, I want to see, Daniel, do we have any questions from the live stream? I've never done live stream before, so I don't know. Not at the moment.
I'm gonna double check the audience.
Okay, all right. So someone here must have a question. Anything. Ask me anything about anything, and I'll answer you. Yeah.
Do you have a list of all of the books you've written? Like, do you have a? Yeah, because I think I've read all of your stuff. I'm not sure.
The first book I wrote was Where Children Run. The next one was When Memories Remain. The next one was the book about the cattle industry. It was this, about the Canadian cattle industry during BSE. And what I did is I drove around, I jumped in my car and I went out west and I interviewed cattle producers about how they were affected. Yeah, so I did that one. And I wrote a manuscript that I shelved during COVID. It's going to become part of this series that I talked about. So it's not wasted, but I've decided I'm going to retool it. And then I wrote Be Still the Water and My Every Breath with Anna Maynard. She couldn't be here tonight. She was going to come as well, but she had to have an operation. She has cystic fibrosis, and she had an amazing life story. And so I co-wrote that one with her. And she was going to come tonight, but the date just didn't work for her. I saw her a couple days ago, and she's doing very well for those of you who've read her story. Yeah, so that's it. Yeah. So if that's it, we'll just wrap up, and then we can chat. And okay, so it's time for the thank yous. First and foremost, I always thank Peter Warren first. Where Children Run never would have become a Canadian bestseller if it wasn't for Peter having the twins on his show. And him and I, we still do keep in touch. I'd like to acknowledge the other Manitoba writers who are here tonight. Nicole Reimer, Lainey Giles, Sharon Arksey, and Bill Redicott. Did I catch everybody? Do we have any other secret Manitoba writers out here that I don't know about? Ah, and what's your name?
Jane Hampton.
Oh.
I did a book of poetry called Manitoba.
Yes, I recognize your name. Jane Hampton as well. Okay. I would now more thank yous. I'd like to, of course, thank Dennis and Robin for coming tonight. And I'd also like to thank Darcy McHugh for gifting me with the prints of the photos up here on the table. You can take a look at those of the old Pishke farm. I met Darcy up in Steep Rock, and she's a big fan, and she is a very good photographer. And she gave me those prints, and so I put them on display. And I've also included on tonight's display a photo of David, who passed away in 2004, and his copy of Where Children Run. It was the first copy taken out of the box on launch night. And after he passed away, his wife, Lynn, gifted it to me. I see lots of book club ladies in the crowd. Many thanks. I know that that some of you drove a long way to be here, and I appreciate it more than I can express. It really means a lot to me to see all of you here, and I hope that you enjoy reading Jaime Dorn's story as much as I loved writing it for you. God bless.
Thank you so much for that, Karen. That was amazing. We are going to move along to the signing portion of the evening. So you can join us right over here at the table. I'm going to clear it out a little bit to make some space. And you can have your book signed before you go to the cash desk tonight. Just make sure you pay for the book before you leave. Thank you once again to all of you for joining us, to all of you online, and of course to Karen Emilson. Thank you and have a wonderful night, everyone.